Hey, what is up guys, it is RB in Hardware, and in today's video we're gonna build the best $800 gaming PC that you can get in January of 2021. Now, as usual, we're gonna go over the whole building process step by step from start to finish, and we're then going to fire up some games and we're gonna find out what kind of frame rate you can expect in case you decide to build this PC. Now, if you find anything you like, all items are linked up down below. Now, for a little bit over $800 for this complete PC build, you'll be able to run pretty much every popular game out there at 1080p ultra settings with respectable frame rate. And if you want to play around with ray tracing, yeah, that is possible on this machine as well. In Cyberpunk, for example, I actually found a pretty good sweet spot where I'm averaging between 50 to 60 FPS with ray tracing and everything turned up to max. But yeah, again, obviously any other demanding game will run great on this PC as well, and this also includes 1440p gaming, which yeah, we're gonna look into a little bit later after the assembly. Now, inside this particular PC we find a 3rd gen 6-core Ryzen processor that performs excellent in even the most demanding AAA titles, and for RAM we're gonna pair the CPU with 16GB DDR4 and memory sticks from Corsair. We find a 500GB SSD, an RTX 2060 with support for DLSS and ray tracing, and everything contained in this great looking NZXT case. Anyway guys, timestamps can be found down below. Now, before we get started, be sure to drop a comment, let me know what you thought about this video, drop a like if you enjoyed the content, make sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. So let's get started with a motherboard coming in around $60 to $70. This is the Gigabyte B450M DS3H, which yeah, is a very reliable and powerful B450M motherboard. It comes with everything you'd expect, plus a few extra features that'll make this motherboard a bit more future proof, like 4 DIMM slots with dual channel support, so you can add if you want another 16GB of DDR4 memory sticks if you want. We also find 8 USB ports, we find 4 SATA ports as well as an M.2 slot, so you can upgrade to a super fast M.2 based SSD later down the road, for example. Now, by only spending about $70 on the motherboard, allow us to spend more of our budget on components that have a bigger impact on the gaming experience, which is the graphics card and yeah, the CPU. For today's build, I went with the 6-core 3rd gen Ryzen 3600, who is finally back in stock again. Now, this budget CPU comes with 6 cores and 12 threads, and it will handle pretty much anything you throw at it with ease. Now, the CPU supports something called SMT, which nowadays pretty much every game has support for, and this will enable your favorite game to run as smooth as possible without any stutter. Taking a quick look at the gaming performance in Cyberpunk 2077, we see that the 3600 is actually trading blows with the 9600K. But yeah, if we look beyond Cyberpunk, we see that the CPU rarely becomes a bottleneck when gaming. Yes, we do see some small differences, but the frame count is so small here guys that the chance of you noticing any difference in a real life side-by-side comparison is impossible. Anyway, the Ryzen 5 3600 has a base clock of 3.6 and a 4.2 GHz boost clock. It is based on AMD's insanely popular Zen 2 7nm architecture, and with Zen 2, AMD has been able to bump both IPC, clock speed and latency stand against previous generation. And yeah, all of this plays an important role for gaming. We're gonna use the processor cooler that comes included in the box. Now, while this heatsink doesn't offer the best thermals and noise levels among other CPU coolers available, it's still perfectly good enough for gaming and a case with good airflow. Now, as we can see guys, our motherboard comes with a retention frame pre-installed, but since we're using a cooler with springs, we need to remove the retention frame from the motherboard, and we do so by unscrewing the 4 screws holding it in place. With the retention frame removed, ensure that the backplate remains in position with the holes on the motherboard. So let's install the processor, which is very easy. You want to locate this golden triangle, and this lines up with the triangle on a motherboard socket. Simply turn the CPU so that the triangles match up, then you open the metal arm, you drop the processor into the socket, You put the metal arm down and our CPU is installed. The cooler installment is also pretty simple. If this is the first time installing the CPU cooler, it should have some thermal grease pre-applied, and in that case you don't need to apply some thermal compound on the CPU lid. Position the CPU cooler over the 4 spring screws, and using a screwdriver turn each spring screw half a turn clockwise to ensure the spring screw makes a connection with the backplate. Follow a diagonal pattern across the CPU cooler, further tightening each spring screw with the full turn. Now with all 4 spring screws connected to the backplate, tighten them until you feel resistance. Then check the CPU cooler to ensure that it's properly secured to the motherboard. Lastly, we connect the fan power cable to the CPU cooler to the CPU fan header on the motherboard. Now we're almost done and the only thing missing is memory, and for today's build we're gonna go with 16GB from Corsair Vengeance LPX, who has actually gotten pretty expensive lately, and so therefore guys, I'm going to link up a cheaper kit down below as well with similar level of quality and performance. 16GB is more than enough for any modern game these days. Now this 3200MHz kit I chose for today's build will give you a bit of a frame rate boost versus using a slow clock kit, as the way that the CPUs work, having a faster clock RAM can gain a bit of performance in your favorite game. Simply pull back the clips for the second and the 4 DIMM slot and simply plug them in just like so. Now the real fun begins. It is time to move our motherboard assembly, if you like, into our case, and for today's build, yeah, we're gonna go with the NZXT 510 coming in at $69. The H510 is a budget-oriented chassis that uses a metal exterior complemented with a tempered glass side panel. Now the case comes with a unique bracket solution for mounting, let's say a radiator in the front, and for cooling we find 2 120mm pre-installed fans here. A very nice and minimalistic looking PC case all in all. Alright, so let's install a motherboard. Now in order to get access to the inside of a chassis, there is a thumb screw we need to untie that is holding the tempered glass in place. Having the CPU cooler already installed, we can just grab onto the CPU fan and slide the motherboard into place, and this can be done by having the case standing up or having it laying down. Now we need to secure the motherboard using the screws that comes provided from NZXT, and with the motherboard installed and secured, before we install our power supply, grab the card and storage. Now is actually a good time to connect the chassis cables that takes care of the front audio, USB, as well as the power button. So let's start with USB 3. This is a white connector, it is fairly thick and it's almost impossible to miss. The connector is located down at the right side corner. Next up we got front audio, and this cable goes to the left side corner. Lastly, before we're done, there is a front panel connector that we find on the lower right side. Let's move on to the power supply, and in today's build I picked up the CV550 550 watt unit from Corsair, coming in at around $60. Now the CV series from Corsair offers high quality power delivery and comes with 80+ bronze efficiency certification, and with top of the line performance, low noise and quality components ensure that your PC and your components run safe. Now you want to make sure that you got the fan facing downwards, then gently slide the PSU into place and secure it. Now it is time to plug in some of the cables to our motherboard, and first up we got the 24-pin power connector that powers the motherboard. This one goes to connector located to the right. Next up we got the 8-pin power for our CPU. This one goes all the way up to the top left side corner. For storage, I ended up picking the Kingston A400 with 480GB worth of space. Now, while this isn't the fastest SSD out there, it offers a great mix between price and performance, and 480GB is actually more than enough to fit a few games. Keep in mind guys, you can always upgrade to a bigger drive later down the road. as both the case and the motherboard has room for up to 2 mechanical hard drives or up to 2 SSDs. Now if there happen to be a cheaper SSD with more storage available on Amazon that offers, similar quality and performance, I will be linking that up down below as an option as well. We're gonna use one of these 2 SSD trays that we find on the back of the motherboard. And to secure the SSD, we're gonna need 4 small screws that comes from NZXT. Plug in the SATA cable that comes with our Gigabyte motherboard, as well as the SATA power connector coming from our power supply. Route the SATA cable through one of the various routing holes and plug it into the motherboard. Time to install our GPU, and for today's build we're gonna go with an RTX 2060 graphics card, which is a brilliant 1440p GPU. Now it does seem like there is a shortage on the RTX 2060 right now, and so be sure to check Amazon several times a day if you're having a hard time finding one at stock MSRP. Now this card should sell for right around $300, and I don't recommend you guys spending more than that. You don't want to feel the scalpers. Anyway, the 2060 comes packed with 6 gigs of DDR6 memory, which is enough for 4K gaming in less demanding games. Now for titles such as Cyberpunk, which is a demanding AAA titles, I recommend settling for 1080 or 1440p at most. So in order to install a graphics card, we first need to remove these brackets, and then we also need to remove these 2 additional PCIe brackets, and simply plug in the graphics card and take this dual PCIe cable and plug it into our graphics card just like so. And before we're done guys, we also need to connect the pre-installed fans to the system as well. Now because our motherboard only got 2 fan headers and one is already being used by our CPU, we're gonna have to add a 3-pin Y splitter. This is so that we can get both included case fans up and running. Now if you're planning on adding more fans in the future, you simply want to pick a fan cable here that supports more fans. Anyway, with that done, whack on the side panels, and if you did everything right, your PC should power on. Alright, so it is time to fire up some games, and let's start with Cyberpunk. And I found a pretty good sweet spot where I'm averaging between 50 to 60 FPS, running the game at 1080p with everything at high to ultra, with ray tracing set to medium. However, that requires that you activate something called DLSS or Deep Learning Super Sampling. Beyond Cyberpunk, the PC will obviously do very well in other games too. And if we take a look at Apex Legends for example, we see that the 5600 XT performs a little bit better at 1080p, while the RTX 2060 performs a bit better at 1440p. But overall the gaming experience will be much the same using either GPU. Next up is PUBG, and we're seeing that the 2060 is about 9% faster at 1080p and about 5 to 6% faster in 1440. Moving on to Battlefield 5, and to make things a bit more interesting, I decided to throw in a few additional GPUs to give you guys a better idea how these 2 GPUs stand versus some of the other popular GPUs picks out there. Now at ultra settings at 1080p, we see that the 5600X is about 4% faster, and at 1440p the gap grows to 10% in favor of the RX 5600X. Next up is Control, a game that seems to be well optimized on Nvidia's GPUs, where the RTX 2060 is about 1 FPS ahead of the 5600, and at 1440p we're once again seeing high numbers on the 2060. Keep in mind guys, we're running with very high settings here, and so this game is perfectly playable if you drop down the settings a bit. The RX 5600 shows healthy numbers in Gears 5 at 1080p, as we can see. The gap between the two shrinks a bit as we bump the resolution to 1440p. Metro Exodus at both 1080 and 1440p also runs a few FPS faster on the RX 5600 XT, as we can see, while in Shadow of the Tomb Raider both cards shows almost identical frame count. Division 2 also runs great on both cards, with the RX 5600 being a tiny bit faster both at 1080p and 1440p resolution. Lastly, we have Forza Horizon 4, and a similar story here again guys, very similar healthy numbers from both teams in this head-to-head GPU battle. Again guys, all PC components can be found down below. Now I am starting up a Discord server, and it would be fantastic if you guys wanted to join the awesome community and start discussing PC builds and issues and everything in between. Now I'm going to hang out there and answer any questions you guys might have, so you definitely want to join. Now watch either of these two videos and I will see you guys in the next video.